Welcome to T-Minus Attending, and I'm your host, Dr. Shishir Shah. I'm a wound care specialist, entrepreneur, private equity operating partner, proud father, and educator. Our goal at T-Minus Attending is to empower new and experienced medical professionals to lead better and live better so they can fulfill their personal professional lives as they grow into their careers. So this is our third episode. I'm excited to spend the next half hour with Dr. Jon Riggs. We'll be discussing the importance of performing a self-check before leading. Dr. Riggs, he's a seasoned board-certified emergency medicine physician who currently practices in Dayton, Ohio. His experience is broad. He started in the Air Force after medical school and residency and was deployed in supporting both the OEF, the Operating Enduring Freedom, and OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and having practiced in all size emergency departments from level 1 trauma centers to standalone and critical access facilities. Since residency, his interest in business and economics prompted him to obtain an MBA from the Raj Soni School of Business at Wright State University, and the benefits of coaching approach to obtaining certification in executive coaching. He recently started, in fact, a coaching consulting practice. In addition to his full-time emergency medicine work, he focuses on physicians and healthcare executives. In addition, he's been married to 29 years and is a proud father of 2. There's plenty of time in his hand, and I appreciate making a few more minutes with us today to speak about self-checking before leading. So Dr. Riggs, welcome to T-Minus Attending. Appreciate having you here today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. I hope I didn't shortchange your career and your background. It's quite impressive, just from brutality of residency, medical schools. I know what that's like, but obviously going to the military, getting deployed, and then obviously going for more education, getting your MBA, and here we are today. So hopefully we didn't miss anything on your background.
No, it's been a slog. I mean, as you know, it's a lot of ups and downs, which, I mean, you learn something from every place that you experience. So it's been good.
Well, you definitely define endurance. What you've been through, what you're doing, what you're currently doing. There's got to be a lot of mental preparedness. So really, the theme of our talk today, having you as our guest, really is spot on for what we're looking at and what we're trying to discuss. I'd like to start a little bit about stressing that mental importance and preparedness and leadership. Maybe you can tell us a little bit, maybe in your military experience or a midpoint and after your training, how that related to you best and how that mentally prepared you for yourself back then and as well today, and developing that mindset as a leader.
Well, I think it allowed me to most broaden my worldview. I grew up in a small town and a fairly conservative background, like a lot of people that I know. So we left Western New York, my wife and I, and went out to Phoenix and went to school and then in the Air Force. And really, the Air Force allowed me to broaden my worldview, come into contact and learn from people that I would have never been able to do otherwise. And that really taught me that there was more to know. There was more to know about myself and really more how to be. That's really what I think is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned is in order to be a strong leader, you have to really know about yourself. I'm 49, so this is something that I've been learning for the last 25 years at least. I mean, probably longer, but I've been aware of it for the last 25 years. And I think that knowing yourself is something that we verbalize, but I think that really doing that is a difficult process. And it takes a lot of interactions with people. It takes a lot of reading. It takes a lot of just inner discovery. I think my time in the Air Force really forced me to do that. I was away from my family for months, and I had a decent amount of time, really downtime that I wouldn't have had otherwise, that gave me the opportunity to really explore myself and other cultures. And I think that's really what started my path and is probably contributed more than a lot of things to my worldview on how to approach leadership.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think you mentioned some key points about looking at yourself, understanding yourself, thinking to yourself, and the time you spent alone is sort of forced upon you. But I don't even encourage that those who are not forced in that situation, you had the sort of the luck and the bad luck.
Sure, absolutely.
Being put in that situation. But if you're comfortable with yourself in a quiet room or in days or hours, that in itself is a challenge, but allows you to think and focus. I think that's a critical thing. And we'll talk about that importance of the self-check as we get into our conversation. But I think that's great. I even relate that. You have kids, I have children, and often if you get upset about something or something frustrates you, there's anxiety or on a situation, you often even then have to do a self-check, like, wait, is it me? Let me, take my own pulse. We learned that in medicine, and before you check the patient's pulse, check your own pulse, right? There's a reason for that. Like, make sure you're in check, make sure you're calm, make sure you've assessed the situation, whether it's, outside or internal, whether it's about your life or about work. I think that self-check is very important. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, because really that's the focus of our discussion. And I want to ask you, how does that experience in the Air Force and thinking to yourself and being prepared and introspection translate when you're working in the emergency department? Because obviously a lot of our audience is really in residency. They're translating that into becoming an attending, whether it's emergency medicine or some other specialty. And how did that bring you over into being an attending and then working on your own?
Like you said, take your own pulse first. And it's really about the pause. We oftentimes don't think that we have the time to pause in urgent situations or even in conversations, because sometimes conversations with family members and with staff that we work with can be some of the most stressful points in our day. And I think it's important to remember that you do have time to pause and that you need to take it, especially if you are recognizing that you are feeling triggered, for lack of a better term, or that you're feeling pressured in a way that doesn't feel safe. I think that the hardest thing, even still, is just realizing that you have the time to pause, because it only takes, a few seconds to really gather yourself, to realize what you want to accomplish and where you need to go next. I think I can think back to a lot of times or in my early career, and it was just my mind in really stressful situations felt blank. And I think that happens just because we've got epinephrine flowing for whatever reason. And if we stop and just realize, hey, you've got a second, take a breath, start back at the beginning, step one, go through it in a stepwise fashion, whatever it may be. I think that's a huge thing for people to remember as they're starting their careers.
That's wonderful example of exactly how to approach it. We talked a little bit about your family, and you say you're married, you have 2 children. Did some of that self-introspection, did you sort of need to bounce some of your thoughts, ideas, and feelings with your family members to kind of recalibrate even outside of work? How did that kind of align together, both at work and, with your family?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my wife and I have been together since the end of college. So it's been a lot of years and a really fantastic journey. She has been my partner and really has been the one that I've been able to reflect off of throughout the years. Now, of course, and I would caution, our young listeners that you need to have more than just your partner to really reflect your feelings and thoughts off of, because otherwise that can be super overwhelming for them. And I didn't learn that lesson right away. It took my wife saying, hey, I need you to kind of run this past maybe some of your friends and maybe not me all the time. It really took that, before I realized that I needed to kind of spread out my questions and my concerns about my job and kind of reflection from other people, which is very, very helpful, like a 360 review to other people other than just my partner. So she has been fantastic at doing that. But I would caution that you can't rely on just your partner to do that, because that can be a lot of real emotional work for them. As my kids have gotten older, they have been really fantastic. It's, the intergenerational gaps are sometimes very difficult. And in medicine, we have to kind of work with all the generations. It's not like we just can choose to work with people that are our age and we speak the same language. So as my kids have gotten older, it's been really helpful for me to, on long trips, road trips, that sort of thing, just to be able to listen to them and find out where they are in their journey. And that's really helpful for me in working with some of the younger generations, because nursing technicians, all, and our patients, of course, are much younger than us, sometimes much older than us. And I think it's really been beneficial, to have my family help me out in that way. I think that really kind of touches on just being willing to speak to people in general. I think that's a huge key. I mean, the more people you talk to from different walks of life, the different age groups, different occupations, I mean, the more you learn, and it gives you tools to use in your work, in your life.
Dr. Riggs, I'm really glad you mentioned that. One of the things I always focus on, I teach resident students as well, is we spend so much time in our education, getting our degrees, that residency, matching, getting the best job you can get, and paying off your debt. And then what is the next 20 years? Like, I get your first home, get your first car, and that American dream. But during that process, I think how much time and energy we spend in our education and that, but we're not really taught in the system, as I call it, about, investing in your life partner. What does that look like? How does that help your mental preparedness? Because you have to spend a lot of energy and time in that development, because that comes back to work. It comes back to your career, your children, your peers, your coworkers, like you said, rely on them. And we talk about children. It takes a village, but I think it takes a village to build us, to create us who we are. I have a saying that's very broad, and often I've explained myself when I said, when I have students in residence, I mentioned, I'll say, you have to know everything about everything. What do you mean? Especially if you're ER, family practice, internal medicine, because you're talking, it's not just the medicine. These days, AIs and algorithms are telling you what to do. You can punch in a computer a symptom and they can spit out the diagnosis and the treatment, but it's really the conversation, the relation. And once you have that broad experience and the depth of different occupations, different people, that eventually allows you to come back and be mentally prepared, self-introspect, see where you are positionally in your life, in the universe, and the people around you. And you constantly improve yourself. And I love the way you said that, because you have to use that feedback mechanism to then come back to yourself and then meditate or pontificate or think or gather your thoughts, however you want to approach it. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I use my running time to really kind of go through, like it's those routine processes where your brain can kind of just spin in the background. And for me, I use my running time or my spinning time or whatever to really kind of just let those thoughts bounce around a bit, then refocus, come back to the present, and then let them bounce around again to try to process a lot of the things that we have to go through, whether it's work or family. I mean, what we do is a lot of emotional work, and I think just like you had alluded to briefly, it is tough on our private lives too. And so that's something that you really need to guard. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I didn't do that so well earlier in my career. Thankfully got past that and realized, oh, hey, I'm not guarding my personal life well enough. That kind of leads to boundaries, which is really important too. But guarding the personal life, yeah, because that's definitely a haven to give you some respite from a lot of the emotional work.
Yeah, I probably see a lot of things similarly. I want to kind of sideline a little bit into education. You're a serial learner, obviously, not just medicine. You went to get your MBA. You're coaching folks. You're obviously reading a lot to then be able to coach, because you have to be well informed and well educated. Can you tell me how your MBA maybe played a perspective in sort of dealing with those battlefields, both in the ER and the military today? A lot of our folks may be interested in going further careers, getting their MBA, doing other things. Can you kind of share a little bit and elaborate on how that ties in with the leadership?
Yeah. No, I finished my MBA a few years ago. I didn't have it earlier. There was a point in my career in emergency medicine when I just really wanted to do something in addition, not something else, not like instead of, but more kind of in addition to, because I don't know, after you practice maybe 10 years, you feel like you see a lot of the same stuff, and your schedule is what it is. And and that's one of the things I talk to the young ER doctors about. One of my favorite books is Range by David Epstein. It's a fantastic book. I always tell my kids that I preach the gospel of range. They're in college right now, so I'm like I'm kind of pushing them to stay broad, and they're doing pretty well with that. That was my MBA, and then my coaching was really my attempts to broaden myself in things that I was interested in. Maybe get me in a direction where I think I might be able to use my talents. Sometimes you find that you can, sometimes you find that you can't, but that education is never wasted. I love my MBA time. I miss it still. Working through the case studies of the businesses, economics. I never did any business, classes in undergrad. So when I got to my MBA, I was like just amazed at the world that was out there. Economics in particular, I love economics, and the economic principles are just fascinating to me. But, I've taken that and it's helped me to see what I can do on my own. And a lot of those lessons in business are certainly applicable to your life. I've used them in my own personal life. I've used it in teaching my kids. I use it in my everyday work in emergency medicine because I talk about some of these principles with the patients and with my colleagues. So even though I'm not working in healthcare administration, which you certainly could do, a person could do with an MBA, I'm not currently working in the business field in a strict sense. It's still great to do education like this, to broaden yourself, because you're always going to use it. The coaching training was absolutely directly applicable to my work in emergency medicine and medicine in general. I kind of wish that all doctors would get some coaching instruction because just in active listening and how to ask empathetic questions are very useful tools that I learned in my coach training. So yeah, I definitely use both of those all the time. They informed my later career because I did those later, but I would certainly encourage younger physicians to consider what they might be interested in getting into in addition to medicine, and maybe starting those things sooner.
I'm really glad you mentioned the personal coach aspect. Obviously, you are one. I didn't use one until maybe about 7 years ago when another colleague gave me as a gift personal coach and sort of a gift card saying, hey, I'll pay for your first few sessions.
That's really neat.
And he thought it was a great thing for himself. And I said, well, okay, now I have to do it because it's a gift and I can't not appreciate what it was given to me. If you think about sports, right? We go through coaching, we go piano lessons, we go to teacher, we go to school for math, we have teachers, and we finish medicine, we have, attendings. But we don't have that life coach, career coach that guide the pathway between age 25 and 85, for instance. And like you said, your spouse can't be your personal career coach. It's too much burden for them. And
absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're thinking the same on what you want to do with your career as your personal life. They're two different things. They intertwine, but they're different. And I would like to bring that up right now, since you are a personal coach and you're a professional coach. Is how do you approach the mental preparedness with your clients? How do you infuse that into the discussion? What's your approach when you are helping your physicians and clients and so forth?
It certainly is individualized. Most of the work from a coaching session is done before and after the coaching session. So even though, I'm seeing a patient for 45 to 50 minutes during a session, initially, I don't know what the person's goals are or what their beliefs are about themselves or about the world around them. So initially, it's kind of general planning to kind of explore those things. We call it being and learning, a couple of different aspects in coaching. But once you get to know the client, you have a session with them or two sessions with them, then you can get some direction. And then it's really about planning tools and activities that may be useful in your sessions to help the client learn more about themselves and where they want to go. Coaching is very improvisational. Like it's like you have a structure and you have thoughts about what might be useful, but then in a coaching session, all those things might go out the window. And then it's just like life, right? You have an idea of how things you want to go. And then you show up and you're like, okay, this went down a totally different path and I'm going to need to, improvise a little bit. But so preparing for it is really about knowing your client and where they are and where they want to go right then. And that changes, through your sessions. And then after the session, it's really about reviewing what you've covered and where the client might want to go next, because it's really you partnering with the client and not necessarily leading the client.
That makes sense. Now, I want to talk, maybe because you've had clients before, and our focus today is a little bit about that self-check and mental status. And let's talk a little bit deeper about that, because obviously, in the media and in our industry, in our field, self-check is important on to the level of burnout too. There's sadly, I've lost some colleagues in suicide. Don't know exactly what was going on in their head and what led them to that. There's a lot of stress. There may be imposter syndrome, which is something we're going to be talking about in a future episode. And there's a lot of burden we carry, whether it's personal, financial, societal. And how do you do that self-check? Have you had discussions like that with clients and physicians? And how does that go in terms of doing the self-check? I know you're not a psychiatrist, but we sometimes play that role when we're helping a colleague.
Right. The thing that I've learned most is that, well, first off, we in medicine have been trained to be pretty fixed mindset people, right? I mean, like it's kind of like you either win or you lose, you pass or you fail, you either did a thing right or you didn't. I mean, and that's, even my daughter is doing pre-med stuff right now, and it hasn't really changed a whole lot. I mean, some of it has changed a little bit, but we're trained to be fairly fixed mindset. And so to have a mindset that is adaptable to, to change and to failure, I think is the biggest thing. I think that's the key. The key is really to know what success looks like, but maybe redefine failure, or to be okay with failure. Because I don't think in medicine, we're really good with failure. I mean, I think we all struggled to be the top of everything for our entire lives. So it's tough to come to a point in our lives where we're like, oh, wait, I need to be a bit more bendy or malleable, and I need to be okay with failing, because, I mean, we're competing is maybe a tough term, but I mean, we're competing with the best of the best when we're at medical school and in residency and in fellowship and then practicing. So I think that one of the keys is knowing that maybe not getting 100% is part of the deal. You can't fix everything. You can't find everything. You're going to have good days and bad days. And if you perseverate on those things because you're really fixed on winning and doing and being the best all the time, then I think it's going to create a tough path and a lot of heartache. So I think that broadening maybe your definition of success and failure and being okay with failure, less than 100%, are really keys to a long and happy career, and maybe avoiding some unnecessary pain.
And those are wonderful tips. And, the failure thing really resonates with me. You went to business school. I'm sure you heard that even more in business school than you ever heard in medical school. In fact, that's encouraged. And fail a lot, fail quickly, and then move on.
Fast,
fail fast. I mean, there's so many books written on this, so many podcasts, I'm sure. It's reiterated in that field. And in our field, in pre-med, that's not discussed, because you got to get that A, you got to succeed. Failure is not an option. In the ER, in the operating room, failure is not an option. We have a bad day when we lose a patient, running a code, or in the OR, if your patient goes south. We take that burden with us. We sleep with that. We don't even share that with other people. That's failure. And then to bounce back from that takes a lot of stamina that we build over time. I remember losing a 16-year-old car wreck, one of my first cases as an attending, and I thought, I'm not really going to do this again.
Right.
Because as a resident, it's interesting learning procedures. When you're on you, failure is a whole different perspective. So I'm glad you mentioned that failure is okay. Define your areas of failure and success, and it's okay to ask for help. Sure. You got to, and whoever that is, like you said, if it's your wife, your peers, if you need a personal coach, a counselor, an old friend, whoever it is, I think that's important. That then allows you to be the better person, allows you to self-check better, as part of our theme today. And I think you have to be able to be comfortable in yourself, in your body, in your mind. And the only way you can do it is accepting that you're human. And us doctors, physicians have a tough time doing that. So I'm really glad you mentioned the failure piece. It's a big part of what we have to accept. We're actually running close to time. And I want to ask you a few things. I feel I got a personal coach session right here today. So I think hopefully our audience felt that way too, that, I learned a lot from you just in the last 20, 30 minutes. And hopefully our audience can take away a lot of pieces. And, if our audience is interested in self-development, in mental preparedness, what should they look for in a coach? Maybe they're going to seek someone like you. What would you suggest if you're going to find someone that's going to be your mentor? What would that look like to help you be a better leader?
I think the biggest thing is finding someone who doesn't want to tell you how to do it. It's very important that the coach really is there to help you discover how you want to be and where you want to go. I think that it also helps to have someone who's probably walked in your shoes a little bit. So I think in medicine, that's what I think is beneficial to having a physician as a coach, is that you have someone who can relate to you. And I think you feel like you can be more open about your own weaknesses and concerns and personal struggles when you feel the person's kind of walked in your shoes. So I would say it doesn't have to be a physician, but it certainly helps. And I think that having someone who is willing to really let you lead the way and not try to tell you what you need to be like are the two biggest things.
That's great. Are there any final practical tips you'd like to offer to our residents or future attendings? Those are in our audience. Any final tips you'd like to say from self-introspection and
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I didn't talk about that I think is super important is feedback. We get feedback all the time, whether we want it or not. And generally we don't want it. And as I've gotten older, I've been a lot better at receiving feedback. And one of the books that really helped me get there is called Thanks for the Feedback. And it really talks about making sure that you understand like what the feedback's about, what the intention is, and then being able to apply that. So I think maybe doing some reading on how can I learn more about feedback and how to take feedback well would be the last thing I would add.
Oh, I love that segment. We often give advice to our patients every day. We're giving advice, telling them what to do. And you got to be able to receive that in whatever form and fashion and take that as a constructive effort rather than a negative feedback. And I really think that's important. I'm glad you stressed that as well. Well, Dr. Riggs, it's a pleasure. I'm really, really excited that we had you here today. I learned a lot myself and I hope everyone else did. And thank you for your time. I know you have a busy schedule. Really appreciate you attending T-Minus.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much.